Meanwhile, looks like Agatha is having a tough time falling asleep. She sits up quickly and uses her powers to confirm that the prince hasn't done anything to her. In fact, he even gave her a certain degree of freedom instead of keeping her powers suppressed with the Stone of Divine Judgment. As she glances out the window, she can't help but lament how quiet it is here, especially in contrast to Tequila, where every winter day felt like a celebration. After all, it was the season of witch awakening, and the lanterns would burn in the streets all night long. Then she thinks about her current situation, and thinks how witches are being hunted by mortals, and the alliance she once knew has also gone. She has no clue what happened, and how did the two extraordinary transcendent witches, Natalia and Alice, lose to the mortals? That's when Nightingale pops into the scene, asking Agatha why she is not feeling cold. The icy lady quickly turns around upon hearing the voice, and she is fascinated that the door is still closed, and there are no footprints, which makes her wonder if Nightingale used her ability to slip inside. Nightingale then speaks up, and since this is the first time they're really meeting, she introduces herself promptly. Well, it's technically the second time, considering the moment when she was hiding in the mist. Agatha curiously asks her if she is also a high-tier awakener. With a casual shrug, our not-so-studious girl claims that she isn't as smart as Anna, and finds all those books and studying a bit boring, so she doubts she'll ever reach that level. Agatha is intrigued by the mention of those books, and asks if she can read them too. Nightingale responds that she can, but only if she joins the Witch Union and works for the prince. Of course, Agatha protests loudly at the thought of working for a mortal, calling all the witches crazy for following a guy. Nightingale raises an eyebrow and asks why she is so stern about humans. Icy Witch then explains that in Tequila, most awakeners employ mortals as their servants, and they are often used for breeding. She firmly believes that mortals are unintelligent but does concede that they can be useful if taught properly. Still, she finds the idea of following a mortal a bit ridiculous. Nightingale then reveals that the prince doesn't treat witches as servants. He helped them while they were being hunted by the church, gave them new abilities, and made it possible for witches to live among normal people. She emphasizes that everyone has a common goal, which is to defeat the church and ultimately, the devils. Agatha then explains that winning against the devils is nearly impossible, and history is living proof of that. She recounts that about 800 years ago, when both witches and mortals ruled everything, humans populated the entire realm. But when the devils attacked, they lost everything, and all that was left were the barren, fertile lands. She further explains that, according to the Alliance records, the Third Divine War is about to begin, and she believes no one here knows anything about the devils. Agatha argues that the only way to have a chance at stopping the devil invasion is to rebuild the Alliance, unify all witches, and use that knowledge to awaken more transcendent witches. Nightingale looks at her and asks why she's so negative. She reminds her that it's been 400 years since the last war, so a lot of things have changed in that time frame. Nightingale reminds her that she must have heard the prince say how mortals can slay devils too. She explains that it's not just about witches. The prince aims to unify everyone on the mainland. He told her that in order to become powerful, unifying as a nation is important. She adds that there's still plenty of time before the Divine War begins, so she encourages Agatha to witness how the prince is making things happen with her own eyes. Agatha is startled by her bold confidence. She can tell that Nightingale doesn't like her very much, and she wants to know why. Nightingale simply tells her that as long as she can swallow her pride and view the prince as a person, she won't dislike her as much. The prince himself wants Agatha to learn to adapt to the present and catch up with what's happening now, and he does not want her to be abandoned by the time. The scene transitions to the Holy City, where we find Maine kneeling before the Pope. He reports that the tundras have calmed down for now, and the snow has receded significantly. However, the arrival of fearsome devils is a more pressing issue than the casualties from their divine punishment. He asks the Pope for his guidance. The old man gestures for him to stand and walk over to him, and Maine promptly complies, sitting right before the Pope's knees. He hopes the Pope is taking care of himself. To this, the Pope responds that he doesn't need to worry about himself, as he will die soon. Maine is shocked to hear this, but the old fart tells him to save his shock for later and instructs him to listen closely. He reveals that his own end is undoubtedly near, so the reason he called Maine here is that he wants him to inherit the title of Pope. They then walk into mysterious tunnels constructed with layers of stone and mud that no one can breach. There are some secrets hidden, and every pope must come here before they inherit the title, and each one is expected to expand and strengthen the church while holding its goals close to their hearts. Maine promptly responds that he knows his goal is to defeat the devils. But the old coot reminds him that this isn't the main goal. The true objective is to earn the smile of God. Once they reach the end of the corridor, the Pope tells Maine to wheel the wheelchair himself, explaining that no one can go further than this point. Maine acknowledges this and promptly starts pushing his senior's wheelchair. As they enter the chamber, the gates behind them close. They walk past walls adorned with portraits of previous popes, including the image of the current pope, which hangs prominently among them. The old man reveals that his own picture was taken only about 6 months ago, so he doesn't look that old in it. He adds that the portrait was supposed to be hung after his death, but he was too impatient to see how it would look. Maine asks if all the portraits are of previous popes, to which the old man responds positively, saying they are the glorious defenders. The past popes ruled as the voices of God and led the church through trials. As they walk further inside, the old man continues narrating that with each generation, they struggled in the torrents of time. They drifted and eventually collapsed, and the upcoming popes will face the same challenges. Suddenly, Maine spots some portraits of women hanging on the wall, and the old man confirms that the witches were also popes. This shocks Maine, but he is even more boggled to see Alice's photo hanging there majestically. He can't help but call her marvelous. The old man quickly bows his head in front of her portrait, and reveals to Maine that she was the first pope and the extraordinary transcendent, known as Alice. The old man reveals that she also held the title of the Queen of Witches. Maine quickly supports the old man as he staggers, and asks why the creator of the church would be a witch. The old fart tells his junior to kneel down quickly, and Maine promptly pays his respects to the witch as well. At that moment, the pope calls out to Zero, and she promptly appears. The pope orders her to bring Maine into her illusions. The lady agrees, and Maine is surprised to see that a pure witch would be in such a secretive place. Even though they were raised by the pope after awakening, they are still witches. Meanwhile, the witch on the other hand begins to weave some kind of magic, causing Alice's painting to move away, and a hidden door appears. The witch then asks for permission to take the necklace off the old man's neck, and he grants it. She walks through the newly opened gate, and the pope turns to Maine, telling him that the crystal she's holding will soon be in his possession. It has the power to open any fortified door, including the church's classified library and its research facilities. The witch gestures for Maine to follow her, and they both enter the gate, leaving the old man behind. As they walk through the empty space, Maine asks her how His Holiness allowed her to get inside. She casually replies that someone has to activate the Stone of Illusion, especially since it requires magic. Maine isn't really a fan of her nonchalance. He thinks to himself that once he inherits the title, he'll teach her a lesson about who's the boss. He annoyingly sits down and tells her to start the procedure. The girl promptly agrees, but says she'll need a little more preparation since it's the first time she's activated this particular illusion. Maine is shocked to hear that this is her first time, and wonders if her claim of being alive for 200 years is just nonsense. This also means that she has never attended any previous inaugurations. Right at that moment, Maine is sent back in time, finding himself in an illusion where all the witches of the Witch Alliance are gathered in a heated discussion. One of the witches states that it's all thanks to Queen Alice's orders that they've gained an advantage against the Mad Devils and their underworld leader. In the heart of the conference, Maine spots the Queen of Witches, Alice, her presence commanding attention. One of the witches argues against the procedure that requires sacrificing their own, and the chances of producing a judgment night are low as well. But one points out that these issues can be fixed over time with further research. The witches continue to argue among themselves about the lives of their kind, and the room is split. That's when Alice commands them to stop yapping, and everyone promptly falls silent at her single command. She then reminds them that mortals cannot win against devils. They can either do nothing and enjoy their final moments as the devils invade, ultimately being wiped away from history, or they can put up one last fight by placing their trust in their divine punishment soldiers. Alice states that while she may be the queen of Comet City, she is willing to leave this decision to the rest of them. She tells them they can choose whether they want to die in silence or exact revenge for their fallen sisters. She believes they can still purge the realm of the dawn of devils and revive the witches' glory days, granting them the freedom they crave. Alice also reminds them that since none of them will be alive to participate in the Third Divine War, either choice will lead to a peaceful ending to their short lifetimes. Maine finally grasps the situation, which is that the production of divine punishment soldiers was originally started by the witches themselves. Meanwhile, Alice challenges everyone to simply stand if they disagree with her proposal. Maine impatiently looks forward to seeing how many will dare to oppose her heartless solution. Right on cue, one of the witches who had protested before stands up, declaring that killing witches for the sake of witches sounds ridiculous. An older witch quickly tries to calm her down, explaining that if humanity dies, the witches will perish too. Another witch also supports this statement, insisting that no matter how many witches they sacrifice, there will always be more to replace them if humanity survives. The more mortals they have, the more witches will emerge, so their numbers can always be replenished. The old lady then asks if the divine punishment soldiers can really defeat the devils. Alice simply replies that she can't be sure because no one will know the answer unless they try. The failure of the divine war has shed light on many problems, one of which is that the devils have far more power than they do. The only thing holding those devils back is the red mist. This means that even if they create huge armies of divine punishment soldiers, they might not achieve victory. Another witch quickly points out that even if there's just a shred of possibility, they'll still give it their best shot. She votes in favor of Alice's plan, and the other witches agree too, hoping that what Alice said will turn out to be true. With that, Alice rules out the final judgment, and says they'll discuss this decision with the rest of the Alliance. The old witch then points out that others might not listen to her, and if she doesn't want the divine punishment operation to have any obstacles, the witches can't exist as the highest ruling power. Alice quickly says that if that's the case, their alliance will have to dissolve, and they'll need to bury everything they've done so far. She claims she'll try to convince them, but if they can't accept it, Comet City will handle things alone and create a new order. Once the main guy finally learns the origin of this divine punishment army, he's at a loss for words. At just the right moment, Zero grabs him and yanks him out of the illusions. He gasps for breath, and she asks if he needs help on his way out. He tells her he can walk himself and asks her to just open the door. Once they're out, he tries to say something to the Pope, but all the lore he just absorbed is weighing heavily on his mind. He starts to feel dizzy and ends up plopping down at his feet. The old man gently pats Maine on the head. The Pope assures his child that the magic stone imprinted the memory into him, so feeling nauseous is natural. He says he felt the same way and will recover with some rest. Zero then asks why she's not feeling anything. The Pope reminds her that she's a witch, and her body is accustomed to magic, since witches are superior to mortals in both stamina and immunity. Maine asks if this is the origin of the church, to which the Pope agrees. He explains that Alice led 3 cities to victory, created brand new laws, and spread the word that witches were no longer chosen by God, but were instead cursed by the temptation of demons. This historic event became known as the Battle of Faith, and it lasted nearly 100 years. He asks if she lived for that long, to which the Pope replies, no. He explains that Alice died in a fight against another extraordinary transcendent, Natalia, and they both died fighting each other. The second Pope kept her mission alive and continued the fight until the other cities fully came on board. Unfortunately, the battle left all 3 cities severely wounded, and they lost almost all their governing power. The mortals who were unwilling to participate in the war settled on this cramped continent and started building a civilization with the natives, eventually forming the 4 great kingdoms. The church had to prune some scattered rebels, but the structure of the world had already been set, and they ultimately failed to unite the continent, all because of the queen's early death. He explains that not only was her ally, Natalia, unwilling to accept her plan, but she even tried to assassinate Alice during a meeting. This was all recorded in the holy books. He claims that if Alice had lived, the Battle of Faith would have ended 50 years earlier, and the church would have had more than enough time to gather all the witches and unify the continent. Maine still seems confused, and asks why the title of Pope is given to the mortals, since it was carried by the witches in the past. Before dropping any interesting lore bomb, the old man tells Zero she should go. The girl promptly leaves. At first, the old man lets out a sigh, then explains that it's because of the fear and weakness mortals feel. Maine is shocked to hear this, and the old man repeats it once again. He explains that Alice mandated that the Pope position must be held by a transcendent witch to restore their glory after the devils were defeated. However, transcendent witches are incredibly rare, so there weren't many suitable candidates. Later on, some accomplished witches with common powers became Pope. But fear and weakness are like venomous snakes. Once they sink their teeth into the heart and mind, there's no stopping them. He reveals that a mortal archbishop worried they would be tricked and oppressed by the witches, so he took the position, and all future popes ended up being mortals. He calls himself and all other mortals cowards who have stolen the fruits of the witches' sacrifice. He insists that no matter what happens, the church will always bury this secret, and the truth of the divine war is all recorded in the Holy Temple. Maine will be the one to carry all of this forward with him. The old man even tells Maine that if he wants to give up the position, that will be his decision to make. Maine asks then, who will carry this burden? But the old man doesn't respond. With that, he dies, leaving Maine shouting in despair. The scene then transitions to the border town, where we see Agatha paying a visit to the prince. He hopes she's enjoying her stay and asks if she likes the porridge and fried eggs of this era. Agatha looks a bit lost in her own thoughts. As a witch of the Alliance, she can usually determine a person's intelligence with just a glance, but she can't do that with him. His eyes are filled with a strange aura and confidence, as if he has lived for thousands of years and has the world in his palm. Anyhow, she responds to the prince, telling him she would have preferred if no witches entered her room without her permission. Prince promptly assures her that he'll have Nightingale knock before coming in. He then mentions that if she wants to go outside and visit the town, Nightingale can show her around. Miss Scroll can also provide any historical information because she has the ability to store every book in her mind. Agatha reminds him that since devils are such a huge threat, she's actually curious to know why he said mortals can win against them. If he can't defend against them, then there will be no one alive to remember history and culture. Prince decides to talk about how the economy works and its benefits for people, but he pushes that aside for now. Since she seems more interested in learning about battles and weapons, he tells her she's in luck because the border town's forces are going to test new weapons this afternoon. But before they head outside, the prince has a question. Agatha sits down in the chair and gives him permission to ask. He asks her how many meals a day the citizens of Tequila City ate, what their staple foods were, how much meat they consumed, what their salaries were like, and if witches ever worked in agriculture or smithing. Agatha nonchalantly reveals that her guards and servants ate 3 meals a day and could have meat every week, except during the months of demons. They served her for life and didn't receive any compensation other than food, shelter, and knowledge. She adds that they did work for witches and handled agriculture by themselves. The prince perks up with excitement at these juicy details, leaving Agatha wondering why he's so interested in Tequila City's quality of life. She's puzzled as to why he seems more focused on these things rather than the devils who dominate most of the realm of Dawn. He then asks her about the Scholarly Guild, which she claims was focused on researching magic stones. Agatha explains that magic stones all began as stones of divine judgment. They could either suppress a witch's abilities or allow witches to tap into different strengths. Tilly curiously asks how the process worked exactly. Agatha explains that the Scholarly Guild dedicated all its efforts to uncovering the secret, and they finally determined the connection between magic and the stones. Many sacrifices were made in the pursuit of this knowledge. She then adds that she could tell him more, but he'd have to exchange it for the method he used to awaken witches. The prince responds that he has no problem with that. Princess Tilly then points out that the magic stone she found in the ruins allows her to fly, and there's no question it's incredibly useful in combat, for both offense and retreating. So, she's curious why someone like Agatha, a higher-tier awakener, chose to retreat to the misty forest on foot instead of using a magic stone like this. Agatha explains that while they understood the relationship between the stones and magic, they weren't able to create the stones themselves. When Tilly asks why, Agatha elaborates that the stones were created by the devils. If the witches had access to a stable source of these stones, support witches could have fought without relying on the divine punishment army. She explains that there's a unique devil they call the Chaos Beast, which looks like a giant flower, about the height of 3 or 4 people, and can use its vines to walk. If it swallows a stone of divine judgment, it can create many different stones. The speed at which it creates them varies depending on the type of stone. Agatha explains that they had ambushed a devil camp far from the battle and captured a chaos beast alive, bringing it back to Tequila for their own benefit. The monster had incredibly low intelligence and converted every stone they fed it, but they didn't know how it worked or how to keep the monster alive. After 6 months, the creature shriveled and rotted like a typical plant. Later, the Scholarly Guild sent many witches to investigate other camps, and all reports confirmed one fact: chaos beasts were the only method for acquiring magic stones. More powerful stones took longer to convert, and most devils used magic stones in combat. For example, mad devils could activate the stones within their arms for powerful ranged attacks. All the stones they had acquired were from enemies or their camps. Tilly is in awe to realize that the stone she possesses is from one of the devils. Agatha confirms this, stating that it probably belonged to an extraordinary transcendent witch. The prince then asks if the devils always possessed multiple types of stones from the beginning. Agatha shakes her head with no, revealing that if that were the case, humans would have been subdued long ago. She explains that during the First Divine War, most devils didn't have stones. They relied on their sheer strength, thick armor, and metal spears to attack human cities, which is extensively detailed in history books. Every battle lasted for hundreds of years until human territory was reduced to just fertile lands. If they had focused all their resources on training combat witches, the devils wouldn't have been able to reach the realm of Dawn at all. During the Second Divine War, the devils gained more methods and strategies, and it only took them 35 years to defeat the humans. The Divine Army might be able to fight toe-to-toe with the leaders of the underworld, but there are just too many devils now. Agatha reveals that she's heard from the elders in the Alliance that witches used to have the upper hand. One extraordinary transcendent witch could slay an army of devils. But the devils have grown in number and efficiency at an alarming rate, so she doesn't know what the next attack will be like. She also goes on to explain how devils are categorized into 3 groups: mad devils, fearsome devils, and the underworld rulers. These terms were only created during the Second Divine War. Before acquiring magic stones, there wasn't much difference between them, aside from size. Tilly curiously asks how the devils reproduce. Agatha is startled by the question and admits she's not sure. It was never recorded, and there's no way to learn it through captives either. What she does know is that without the red mist, devils die quickly. The captured devils always died before witches can even understand their language, and the devils that don't rely on the red mist are low-intelligence beasts, so communication was never an option. She further explains that there are many different types of devils. but they're roughly divided into two groups, those with magic and those without. The latter can live without the red mist, but they are essentially the same as animals in both appearance and intelligence. For example, devils use an 8-legged caterpillar to transport resources and terrifying flying beasts as mounts. The prince pulls out one of Sora's paintings and asks if this is what the flying monsters look like. Agatha looks at it and agrees, then asks where he encountered them before. The prince explains that they aren't far from here. At first he thought they were simply demons that the devils had tamed, but now it seems they aren't the same thing. Agatha confirms, saying that's definitely not the case. Demons are just food for devils, and even large abnormal demons are enemies of the devils. When the months of demons begin, the devils' attacks are reduced since they're busy fighting off the demons too. This always gave the witches some breathing room. She then asks where the nest of the devils is located. Tilly explains that it's to the west of the forest, behind a huge snowy mountain, and it's covered in mist. The prince adds that when they tried to get close, a massive devil in a watchtower spotted them, and it was a miracle they managed to escape. Agatha sinks into deep thought after hearing this, then abruptly stands up, declaring they should attempt an attack on that camp. She explains that those stone towers are used to maintain the red mist, and they regularly diffuse the liquid inside, meaning they have to resupply at times. That's why the devils were burrowing into the ground. They were trying to conserve their consumption. Wendy and the others tense up at the idea of attacking the devils, while Agatha continues, saying that if there's a tower devil, she's almost certain there's a chaos beast in the camp as well. Chaos beasts can always produce the last magic stone the devils created, and even if it's not a high-tier stone, it would allow her to continue the scholarly guild's research. They might even discover how the conversion process works. The prince asks her about the red mist, wondering if it's safe to go near it, even though it isn't corrosive. Agatha explains that the mist reacts negatively toward witches, but according to the guild's research, mortals, animals, and plants can survive in the red mist, and fire can make it dissipate faster. She's fired up about taking on the devils and challenges the prince to prove his bold statement that mortals can defeat them. She lays out a plan, saying that winged devils can be distracted by witches capable of flight, while the rest of the group sets up an ambush to lure the devils into a trap. Tilly, being one of the witches who can fly, feels irritated at the idea of being bait for the devils. That's when the prince reveals to her that their scouting mission was conducted using a hot air balloon, not with flying witches. He explains that this device can only carry 10 people at once, making it impossible to transport an entire army. He points out that her plan just isn't realistic, especially since they don't know how many devils there might be, and expresses concern about the casualties they could suffer in close combat. Besides, luring winged devils is a dangerous task and he can't put anyone at risk. Agatha is forced to reflect on how fighting devils under favorable conditions is nearly impossible. Whenever Tequila sends an assault, everyone is prepared to die. She starts to think of the prince as inexperienced, believing that casualties are typical when trying to achieve a goal. In her mind, he doesn't seem to understand the harsh realities of war if he cares so much about the troops' safety. She is seriously annoyed, and Wendy tries to cool her down, reminding her that maybe they'll think of a better plan once she sees the new weapons in the afternoon. But Agatha remains frustrated with the prince, and she is sure that no matter how powerful weapons this mortal has, he is still no match for devils. The prince then asks why they call it the Divine War, when all they've really been doing is defending themselves against invaders. Agatha replies that she doesn't have a conclusive answer since the books never mention why they fought those wars. However, she does agree that it's not wrong to call it a defense, especially since the devils did come to the realm of dawn through the underworld gate. She explains that according to history, the gate opens with every blood-red moon to swallow their world. It appears every few hundred years, and that's when the first devils came through, plundering the realm of dawn. The devils can only produce the red mist towers when the gate is active, and these black towers are even taller than mountains. Their range can cover almost the entire fertile lands, and once the devils settle, they attack from the edges of their red mist. Agatha is certain that this time, humanity might not have any chance against the devils at all. At that moment, Tilly offers them a chance to join the shelter on Slumber Island for safety. But Agatha just annoyingly snaps at her, asking how many people a small island can even harbor. And besides, seeking refuge there would only delay their demise, not prevent it. Finally, Prince claps his hands to disperse the tension, urging everyone to maintain a positive attitude, especially since they are already preparing for the Third Divine War in advance. He begins to walk out, saying that they can discuss other matters after lunch. As they head to the lunch area, it's clear that someone is seriously annoyed, and of course, it's Agatha. She can't believe the prince has the mood for lavish food in such desperate times. These ignorant mortals seem to lack vision. What's even worse is that she can't bring herself to reject the delicious spread laid out before her, regardless of how angry she is at the prince. As a high-level witch, she finds it utterly embarrassing to indulge in such feasts when Tequila's name is on the line. Meanwhile, Wendy, as usual, tries to calm Agatha down with her cheerful side, reminding her that enjoying a meal could be a way to keep their spirits up during these difficult times. Once the dinner wraps up, she asks why the prince left since he was supposed to show her weapons. Wendy tells her that he's taking a nap and that it's his habit, and a well-deserved rest is essential for handling his governing duties. Of course, Agatha finds it ridiculous, thinking it's just a lame excuse for his laziness. She then asks him why everyone trusts him, and why they believe he can defeat devils and take down the church. Wendy just smiles and replies that it's because the prince can make the unimaginable a reality. To her, everything the prince has done is a miracle. She explains that when witches were being hunted down, the prince saved the association. While everyone viewed them as evil demons, he created land shared by both mortals and demons. He even defended the town against months of demon attacks with an army of civilians, and took down a Duke of Longsong Fortress. Now his enemies think twice before stepping into the western region. Agatha then states that these are conflicts between mortals, which is totally different from a fight between devils and the Divine Punishment Army. Wendy then explains that the prince has also taught them knowledge that helps witches evolve, and he's created mighty weapons and machines. She shares that these are miracles she has witnessed herself. They aren't folk tales or myths. They're happening right before everyone's eyes, and one day he will become the king of Grey Castle and lead them to victory against any enemy. Later, we see Agatha strolling through the town with the prince and other Slumber Island witches. My guy is feeling quite tired, yawning over and over, which is just annoying the hell out of Agatha. She's literally itching to slap him awake with a palm full of snow, but she doesn't want her fellow witches to misunderstand anything. As they walk, she notices that his inner district is far too neat and orderly. However, these houses aren't anything special, and even the castle is nowhere near as grand as the Scholarly Guild Tower. Agatha then asks how many people are living here, to which Nightingale responds that they started with around 2,000. Of course, Agatha is shocked and asks how the hell a town with only 2,000 people is going to take on the devils. But she's even more bewildered when Nightingale reveals that the population has grown to 30,000. Agatha can hardly believe it and wonders if they counted the nearby villages too. You see, cities need to expand when they reach a certain population, and she knows all too well that this can cause problems. The demand for food and water skyrockets, poorer districts suffer huge blows to safety, and an overburdened population can weaken defenses and paralyze the city. She understands all these difficulties that come with expanding civilization from her own experiences, and she can't help but think that maybe Nightingale doesn't realize just how tricky it can be. As they approach the wall, the soldiers promptly salute the prince, and the prince quickly tells them to get ready for the test. Agatha, on the other hand, sneers and asks if this is the wall they've been boasting about. It has neither palisades nor moats, and she's certain that devils could easily climb over it without any tools. My guy just tells her to hold her horses and watch. That's when he proudly introduces the border town's new weapon, the 152mm Standard Fortress Howitzer, powered by Justice and Glory. He boasts that it has many improvements over the 12-pound field cannon and possesses outstanding qualities that make it an age-defining weapon. Nightingale perks up at this speech, clapping in full excitement, while Agatha still looks unimpressed, unsure what's so exciting about it. The prince clears his throat and tells Ironaxe to start the test, while Agatha still looks dejected, thinking to herself that they're just wasting time. The last word he said about justice and glory didn't even make sense and sounded completely made up. Once the preparations are complete, the prince tells everyone to cover their ears, leaving Agatha bewildered that they're ready so soon. Every witch in the area covers her ears tightly as they fire the giant shell with incredible speed, leaving nothing but flames behind. Agatha trembles in anxiety at the massive explosion, and once the fire subsides, Nightingale asks her if she's all right, and the icy witch replies that she's fine. She looks ahead and sees nothing, wondering why nothing happened, and if those flames were just for intimidation. Meanwhile, the prince is trying to see where the shell landed, and Sylvie points out that it hit a small hill. The red flag is the nearest marker, but there's still some distance to cover. Agatha asks for clarification about what's going on, and the prince explains to her that this weapon can shoot artillery shells. She can think of it as a ballista bolt aimed at enemies far away. They had planted red flags 5,000 meters away, but the shells only landed a little over 3 miles. Agatha finds it amazing that there are no ropes or anything, so how did they even launch a projectile that far? Even a siege beast powered by magic would have a range of around 2 miles at most. If this weapon is actually capable of such distances, then they can definitely fend off devils approaching the wall. However, she's worried that a weapon of this caliber will take time to reload and fire again. That's where she finds herself mistaken because the prince casually tells everyone that he's not done yet, and that they will now test 3 shells at rapid fire with a closer target. Once the weapon launches those shells, The area where they landed erupts in chaos and fire, leaving Agatha in awe. At that speed, even an extraordinarily powerful creature wouldn't be able to dodge that attack. She's sure that if Tequila had a weapon like this, the devils would never be able to breach their walls. She then asks the prince if this weapon was developed by witches. He replies that it's technically true, as it was the combined effort of both witches and mortals. You see, Anna smelted each part individually, while Usia extracted purified elements, and Sylvie checked for all imperfections. The shells were developed by the alchemists and their apprentices, and every witch involved, except Anna, is a support witch. Well, this is finally a solid slap to her face, and she has started to think that mortals might actually defeat the devils after all. Let's not forget about Princess Tilly as well. She's also not very used to seeing the godly weapons my guy is whipping up. We also see Andrea and Ash. Andrea is confused about how this was even constructed and where its power comes from, while Ash thinks this is just like how Andrea shoots her magic arrows. Andrea proudly reminds her that her radiant magic bow is completely different from this thing. Meanwhile, Princess Tilly feels quite left behind. She can't help but think how her brother is really far away from her in terms of advancements and knowledge, and she has no clue what goes through this goofball's mind. Meanwhile, as much as he might be feeling proud of himself, but he is equally devastated internally because this test has cost him a shit ton of money, and his heart is literally aching. He even looks quite dejected for a moment, leaving Tilly even more confused about his eccentricities. Later that evening, once they found themselves in the castle, the prince invited his sister for a discussion. It was apparently about how he's going to deal with the Third Divine War and their future. He starts the conversation by stating that they've learned from Agatha that the four great kingdoms are merely a fraction of the realm of Dawn. Even the wastelands used to be fertile lands, and humans had no choice but to retreat here after losing to the devils twice. The gate will open soon, and the Third Divine War will soon be upon them, so he's hoping his sister can stay here. Tilly goes quiet for a moment before breaking into a happy smile, saying she didn't think he would say that. The prince then explains that the devil's power is unpredictable, and they have to combine all their forces if they want to win. Although Agatha mentioned that the First Divine War was fought through the efforts of both witches and mortals, it's very likely they were only allies on the surface. It wasn't very different from the Second War. He reminds her that his new plans include weapons that can defeat devils, and he has already shown proof of that. Once he turns these ideas into reality, mortals can be more powerful than they've ever imagined. He believes that the right choice is to send mortals into the war while assigning witches to manufacture weaponry. Before the war begins, every extra worker will only make them stronger. Tilly then asks, if she stays, what will happen to the witches at Slumber Island? Well, this sounds like a green light, and the prince bursts into happiness that his sister is actually ready to stay. He quickly tells her that they can all come to the border town, and they have more than enough space to shelter them. He will assign them a large swathe of land and make sure they are treated equally to the Witch Union. They don't have to join the Witch Union, and she can remain their leader. Princess asks if he don't mind that most of them are not able to fight. To this, he says he has no problem at all. In fact, he believes that support witches are more useful than combat witches. They don't empower themselves, rather, they benefit thousands of others. The natural world is full of undiscovered potential, and if they utilize it, support witches will be invaluable. His sister smirks upon hearing this and asks if this was his true objective all along, leaving him startled after getting caught. In any case, she finally says that she can work on these terms, as there's no reason for her to reject his offer to fight against the devil's invasion. Personally, she also wishes to stay here and learn about his interesting newfound knowledge, though she can't agree to anything just yet. The prince asks why not, and she explains that since she is the elected leader of Slumber Island, their future cannot be influenced by her personal desires. If they move to the western region, they will lose their independence, and if anything happens, they will be helpless to resist. She reminds him that if a conflict arises between the two siblings, there is no surety that he won't kick out all of her witches from the border town. The prince startles and stumbles over his words while Tilly makes it clear that she cannot entrust their future on just one word alone. She asks him if he would entrust everything if the roles were switched. The prince tries to tell her that she is his sister, and he would never dare to hurt her. But Princess Tilly replies that she still finds it difficult to believe, so she can't accept his offer immediately. She decides to continue their relationship as allies for now. He will have her full support for the border town's expansions, and if he needs any witches, she will do her best to satisfy his request. And if the devils overwhelm him, he is welcome to Slumber Island to live the rest of his life in peace. With that, their discussion wraps up. Once she is gone, Roland sinks into despair. Nightingale pops up beside him and asks what he said to her that day when she arrived at the border town. He replies that he only told her half the truth, so he can understand if she doesn't believe him right away. He then gives an analogy to Nightingale, reminding her that if her brother came back completely different, what would be her honest reaction. She raises an eyebrow and asks if he's talking about the guy who literally stabbed her in the back. The prince feels out of place and quickly says he shouldn't have brought that up. Nightingale reassures him that she has left the Glen family behind. That family feels like strangers to her now. Come to think of it, we have come so far in the story that I have literally forgotten about her tragic background. Anyhow, the prince reminds her that he's now like a stranger to her sister as well, and besides, she didn't like him from the start when they used to live in the castle together. Nightingale leans in and says she's curious about his life in the royal castle. She also wants to know just how awful he was, given his infamy even reached Silver City. The prince feels embarrassed and admits he was much worse than she might think. He figures Tilly probably started hating him after he pushed her into that pile of broken glass. Nightingale agrees that he did some seriously bad stuff, but she doesn't think she hates him now. The prince asks how she knows that, to which Nightingale replies that Tilly has never lied to him, and if she really did hate him, she wouldn't still be here. He then politely asks if she's just saying that to make him feel better. Nightingale pouts and insists she means it. She reminds him how Tilly agreed to send witches to support the town and help fight against the devils, so how is that any different from her staying here? Also, she jokes that if all the witches from Slumber Island come at once, it's going to be really annoying, especially if there are more people like Ash. Not everyone is as friendly as Maggie, after all. Just as they're talking, Nightingale notices someone approaching and quickly starts to disappear. When the prince gives permission for the visitor to enter, Agatha steps inside. As the prince makes her comfortable in a chair, she points out that, according to Miss Wendy, he was the one who developed both the incredibly powerful muskets and cannons that can rival a transcendent. She then asks if there are any mechanisms or blueprints recorded in those books of his. The prince promptly pulls out 2 books and asks if she's referring to Natural Science 101 and Chemistry 101. He explains that these books only highlight the fundamental principles, but they don't contain any blueprints. Agatha then reluctantly says that since only the Witch Union can have access to these books, then she requests to join it. The prince cheekily reminds her that the Witch Union is an organization within Border Town, and he asks if she's really willing to work for it, since its leader isn't a transcendent witch but just an ordinary guy. Agatha bows her head and replies that his knowledge to create weapons capable of destroying devils makes him far from typical. As long as he doesn't oppose alliances and ensures the survival of witches, she wouldn't mind working for the Witch Union. Though she looks a bit reluctant, even the prince is surprised by her acceptance, since he wasn't expecting her to agree so easily. He then asks why she didn't join Tilly on Slumber Island, since it's a city built by witches. Agatha responds that she has no interest in joining a refuge. To her, it's all pointless if they can't fight off the demons. The prince then reminds her that since he also wants to crush the church, she might be seen as an enemy by the Alliance survivors, as it's possible they simply changed their names and stayed hidden all these years. After putting in a lot of thought, he's come to the conclusion that even if the Alliance lost Tequila, they would still have extraordinary transcendent witches and divine warriors. Since they migrated to underdeveloped lands, it's unlikely they just disappeared. He even believes the church might have been founded by the Alliance, not mortals, and that mortals didn't steal the divine punishment method from witches. Instead, it was created by witches to hunt other witches and mass-produce divine punishment soldiers. We, of course, already know the truth, and the prince isn't far off, as the church was indeed founded by the Alliance. Agatha, however, is having a hard time believing that it was the Alliance that started the oppression and slaughter of witches. The prince says it's all just his hypothesis for now. He then pulls out a book and reveals that it's a historical record written by the church, which also includes a chronicle of the 4 great kingdoms. He tells Agatha she can study it if she wants, but no matter what, the church is now their enemy. One of his goals is to destroy them, so if she decides to stand with the witches and fight the devils with him, the Witch Union will welcome her. Well, we all know what her decision will be. The scene then transitions outside, where Agatha demonstrates her abilities. The prince and Nightingale watch closely, and Nightingale notes that Agatha's magic is shaped like pentagonal prisms, with her capacity being at an intermediate level. Sister Scroll categorizes Agatha as a summoning-type witch who has already evolved once. She originally had the ability to create cool temperatures, but after her evolution, she can freeze the air into ice, which is a very convenient power. The prince then asks how she evolved, to which Agatha replies that it was through continuous practice and a sudden epiphany. She explains that she practiced every day to freeze water at a faster speed and lower the temperatures even more. One day, she saw a witch melt lead with her flames, and as the lead started to bubble from the rising temperature, that is when she realized that everything has 3 forms: gas, liquid, and solid. Lead exists as a solid at room temperature, but with enough heat, it can become a gas. Similarly, water exists as a liquid at room temperature, but with enough cooling, it turns to ice. This revelation transformed her magic from within. After ascending to a higher-tier witch, She recorded the principle into the Codex of Principles. The prince nonchalantly asks her what this Codex of Principles is. Agatha, a bit bewildered, responds that she's surprised the prince isn't more shocked about the concept of matter shifting from solid to liquid and then to invisible gases. To which the prince asks her why he should be surprised, especially since it's a common observation that gases come in many different types, each with its own boiling and melting points. So there's nothing to be surprised about, and it's all covered in Natural Sciences 101. Of course, poor Agatha is annoyed that her important discovery has been dismissed, like it's just trivial knowledge. She then reluctantly says that the Codex of Principles is a record of every high-tier transcendent witch's awakening process. She further explains that since every witch has different abilities, it's tough to imitate someone else's experiences. The prince then asks her if there weren't any witches with similar abilities that transcendent witches had, since there are thousands in the Alliance. Agatha explains that the scholarly guild believes the shape of magic determines its abilities, and no witch has the exact same shape. But the prince pushes back, asking how she knew that Anna is a flame type. Agatha reveals that it's just a common designation. Any ability that glows or gives off heat can be categorized as a flame type. Agatha goes on to explain that as magic grows, matures, or even awakens, similar abilities can become incredibly different. A basic flame ability might eventually lead to better control of temperature, bigger size, more intensity, or even creating projectiles. The scholarly guild has much more formal categories, which are pretty similar to what they use. Sister Scroll then asks if they also have 3 types of witches, but Agatha explains there are actually 4. The main difference lies in summoning, and the guild splits it into 2 types. First, there's conjuring, and second, construction. The prince then points out that Anna is a conjuring witch because she constantly drains her magic, and the things she summons disappear when she stops. Soraya, on the other hand, would be a constructing witch because her paint can exist on its own. Agatha adds that she's not too familiar with Soraya's abilities, but that sounds about right. She also mentions that a summoning construction magic would hold its form, like her ice. The prince smirks and says that their test will end here for today. When Agatha doesn't have any tasks, she's free to practice her abilities on her own. However, he hints that someone might desperately need her help. Agatha curiously asks who, and the prince tells her that Kyle Sichi, the chief alchemist in Bordertown, could use her assistance. Apparently the guy's been acting like a maniac, pushing forward despite the risks, and poor Nana has been terrified, constantly healing him over and over. Later, back at the castle, the prince is deep in thought about how maintaining a stable temperature is crucial for safely extracting nitroglycerin. Agatha's ice coffin could easily keep things below freezing, which is perfect for cooling the reaction vessels under pressure. But he's also a bit worried about whether Agatha will get along with Kyle, given that Kyle is blunt and Agatha comes off as an arrogant royal. Just as he's lost in thought, Margaret tries to pull him out of his daydream. He quickly snaps back to reality, and she asks him what's wrong, wondering if he's upset because she charged too much to transport the refugees. He quickly denies it, saying that if it weren't for her ships, those refugees would have died in the freezing slums of other cities. Margaret then remarks that it's rare for him to ask for her help with such urgency, so she'll try her best. But many of her sailors aren't willing to travel in winter, so she's only managed to gather 13 ships. She also mentions that she probably won't be able to visit as often next year. The prince asks if she's talking about the saltpeter trade convention, and she responds positively. Apparently, Timothy has banned the saltpeter business, and even the cities of Redwater and Silver aren't selling it anymore. Her only options now are to sell at a low price to the Alchemy Association or to elites in the capital. She's also heard from government officials that Timothy plans to lock down the entire western region. It won't just be saltpeter. Merchants will be trapped in Redwater, and Bordertown, Longsong Fortress, and Willowtown will all be affected as well. Many elites are opposing this, but Timothy probably won't retract his orders. If they can't trade saltpeter and other resources here, even the steam engine business might have to stop. The prince's expression turns serious as he listens, realizing that Timothy has become desperate ever since the witches dropped that nuke on his castle. Otherwise, he wouldn't be making such a risky move. You see, saltpeter is crucial for producing acid and other resources. If they lose access to that, their 152mm cannons will just be decorations, and their new rapid firearms will be useless too. Since Bordertown is still in its early stages of development, without income from the steam engines, he is worried the region's economy could easily collapse. The prince reassures her that what Timothy is doing won't last long and that she'll be visiting Bordertown again very soon. He adds that when she does, it will be a brand new city. He goes on to share his plans to open a commercial sea route contracted with the bay that won't pass through Seabreeze Town or Clearwater Port. Instead, it will go directly from the western region to the Bay Islands. He asks if she's interested, but she admits she's not sure if there are any harbors that reach the ocean. The prince replies that not right now, but he's going to build one. He reveals that there's a shallow beach south of Border Town with ideal water depth and size, making it perfect for a seaport. With some modifications and clearing the mountains along the coast, they could export goods from the western region. She would manage the ship transportation and sales, while the western region would provide merchant goods. He then calls out to his butler, Sean, telling him to show Margaret the newest goods. Sean promptly brings over a bunch of bottles, and the prince encourages Margaret to open one and smell it. Once she does, she's shocked to realize it's perfume. She can hardly believe he started making perfume. The prince just asks if it compares to what the Alchemy Association makes. Margaret admits that this stuff actually seems more potent, and she can only think of one word: amazing. She wonders if it was made by Border Town's alchemists. The prince tells her she can have those for free. She happily accepts the gift and asks how many bottles he can produce in a year, explaining that the Bay merchants are very particular about fishy odors, and the capital's Alchemy Association can never keep up with demand. The prince keeps his tone low-key and says that if they have enough ingredients, he can produce up to 10 times the Alchemy Association's output. But deep down, he knows it could be even more now that Leaf and Evelyn are collaborating. He's confident their sales will skyrocket, but he can't just sell it like cabbages. The prince is hoping that Margaret will help him spread these goods, and she smiles, saying this is quite a rare opportunity for her, so she will try her best to make the most out of it. A little later, Agatha finally finishes reading the books. She finds it hard to believe that a mortal wrote something like this. The more she reads, the more she understands the world as a chaotic place, with hidden laws that everyone must follow. If this person were in Tequila, the Alliance would definitely accept him, and he would be treated just like a high-tier witch. She wonders where he gained this knowledge because she used to think mortals were limited when it came to technology. Tilly responds that she doesn't have a clue either. She explains that back then, her brother was arrogant, cowardly, and talentless. He was illiterate, and his personality was pretty terrible too. She further says that he was just a waste of oxygen, not a prince, to which Agatha replies that this sounds like a typical mortal. Tilly insists he wasn't even great by mortal standards. She explains that he always keeps things to himself while expecting others to believe in him, which is just impossible. Abruptly, Tilly goes quiet when she realizes she's said too much. Anna reassures her that it's the first time she's heard her talk about these things, but Tilly still feels terrible because she's supposed to be the Witch Union ally, and that was pretty rude of her. That's when Anna assures her it's fine, saying the prince wouldn't care about something like that. She believes he has his own issues to deal with. Tilly then mentions that in the beginning, he was just like everyone else, except maybe a bit more outspoken. However, once she heard rumors that he wanted to marry witches, his older brother Timothy and Gerald started bullying him in the name of justice, and his personality began to get worse. Agatha finds it odd that he was teased for wanting to marry a witch because in Tequila, that would have been a respectable dream. There aren't many mortals who marry witches, and most witches don't want to spend the rest of their lives stuck with a man. Tilly adds that everything is different now. If he marries a witch, it would mean he wouldn't have any heirs. But she figures that since it's been over 10 years, he's probably forgotten about the idea of marrying witches. That's when Anna tells them that the prince still wants to marry a witch, which shocks Tilly, and Anna further claims he said it himself. The scene then transitions to Longsong, and we finally see Ambassador Petrov after a long time. As he gets out of bed, his lover asks if he's not going to sleep a little longer since it's too early for him to be up. He replies that the prince wants to meet him, so he is going to visit the border town. She questions why he's going out in this harsh weather. Petrov explains that it must be something important, so he needs to get ready. He'll be gone by the afternoon, and he tells her to head home. He'll come back for her when he returns. The girl asks why he can't just ignore him. She points out that even though the prince has captured Longsong Fortress, Petrov is still its ruler, and she's sure that even a king's orders wouldn't require such urgency. Petrov gently pats her head, saying that the western region is out of the king's control, but Prince Roland governs it. Roland isn't just the leader of the border town, he oversees the entire western region. With that, Petrov begins his journey, accompanied by a few of his men. As they walk, he reflects on how, ever since the months of demons began, there hasn't been much to do at Longsong Fortress. Since his father is filling in for him, and with the help of his servants and apprentices, they should definitely be able to handle things while he's off visiting the border town. He thinks back to how, just a year ago, he also traveled to the border town in the midst of snow, carrying a warning from Duke Ryan which he had to deliver to Prince Roland. Now he's heading there simply because of a letter from the prince. Suddenly they hear some commotion nearby. Petrov tells his men to check it out, adding that if it's just a typical scuffle, they should kick the troublemakers back into their homes. Later, Petrov's men take out troublemakers causing the ruckus. One of them is an elderly lady, who points accusingly at a red-haired girl, telling everyone they must kill her because she's a demonic witch. But there's a kid standing by the girl's side, insisting she's not demonic at all. He argues that, just like in the plays, there are good witches and bad witches, so there's no reason to harm her. The poor girl is crying, trembling in fear. Petrov calmly asks the elderly woman if she's certain the girl is a witch. The woman insists it's true and warns him not to be misled by those theater plays. She claims she saw the girl using her demonic powers to melt snow off the roof, saying she witnessed it with her own eyes and doesn't know what this girl is plotting. She then laments how all of the churches have been burned down in the western region, but she is sure that the holy city will build more and everyone will be able to achieve God's pity and protection. That's when Petrov tells his men to lock up the old hag, stating he wants every believer of the church locked away once he returns. With that, they drag the old woman out, and Petrov squats down, gently asking the little girl to show her powers if she really is a witch. The boy beside her warns Petrov not to touch her. The girl, on the other hand, trembles, unsure of what to do, but Petrov reassures her that if she can prove she's a real witch, he'll let her go. She promptly unleashes her abilities and melts the ice on the ground right away. Petrov tells her to come with him, and the girl asks where he's taking her. He replies that he's taking her to a place for witches. Petrov's assistant picks the girl up in his arms, while the little boy left behind shouts for them to let her go, reminding them that they promised to leave her alone. Their boat sails down the river, and that's when we learn the girl's name is Paper. There's no doubt she's an orphan. Only someone with such a simple name would be. I'm glad that even though this is a Chinese comic, they still use English names. Otherwise, I would have had to come up with random names for every witch, which would have been fun too, I guess. Anyway, Petrov promptly offers her some food while asking why she won't use any blankets. He admits that they are definitely not the most comfortable thing, but they'll keep her warm. As the girl blows on the hot food, she says that she'll make it dirty. Petrov reminds her that the sailors aren't any better off than she is, and this trip is going to take 3 days, so she should make herself comfortable as much as she can. Suddenly, she burns her tongue on the hot food, and she looks absolutely adorable. Petrov then asks her about the boy, wondering if he was her friend. She tells him that he was the one who provided food, and requests Petrov to not capture him since he is not a witch. She further reveals that the boy told her that if they cleared the snow from rooftops in exchange for food, everyone would be fed. With the theater in town, no one is afraid of witches anymore. He's the one who negotiates with the adults as long as she's willing to help. Petrov finds it amazing that this little girl is helping her community to earn some honest food. He then asks her if she got any food. She replies that she did. She cleared 3 roofs. One homeowner chased her away, another gave her some bread, but the 4th house belonged to a hateful woman. He pats her gently and tells her to rest and eat well, adding that in 3 days, she'll meet the prince. Of course, the mention of the prince perks her up. And fast forward 3 days, Ambassador Petrov finally meets Prince Roland, who promptly welcomes him back to the border town. Petrov respectfully pays his regards, saying that the Honeysuckle family has sent their greetings to the prince as well. Prince Roland invites him to sit, and reminds him that the reason for this urgent meeting is something that could affect the entire future of the western region, including Longsong Fortress. Petrov promptly asks him to explain further, so Roland then reveals his grand plan to build a metropolis, which will stretch from the misty forest in the west to Longsong Fortress in the east. This metropolis would encompass half of the western region. Since Longsong Fortress would be the eastern half of this new city, it would also become the first line of defense against the church, meaning it would no longer be an independent city as it is now. He further explains that the vast territory will be governed by the same laws and managed by the same bureaucracy. The elite will no longer have any influence in government, not even the 5 great families. Petrov finds all of this absolutely amazing because, a year ago, he had a similar thought about moving their defenses to the border town and utilizing the land between them. But Duke Ryan never made it happen, but the prince is taking it even further. There's no doubt that the prince has already made his decision about this territory expansion, and this is the only reason he's sharing this with Petrov now. No one can stop him at this point, and all Petrov can do is protect his own interests in this grand revolution. With that in mind, Petrov asks him how the Honeysuckle family can help if the 5 families won't be involved in the government. Prince Roland commends Petrov for his quick-witted thinking, saying he has always been impressed by Petrov's insights ever since he accepted the offer to govern the fortress. He appreciates Petrov's positive attitude and acknowledges that these are intelligent qualities he rarely finds in the elite. The prince assures him that as long as the Honeysuckle family continues to serve him, they can manage the Longsong area. Petrov promptly bows his head, saying that he and his father will always follow the Highness's judgment. The prince clarifies that while the Honeysuckle family will still have a role in managing their lands, they won't have the same political power as before. From now on, all elites under his rule will have land but won't govern it. All laws and regulations will be managed by the city hall. He further states that land can be inherited just like elite titles, and the Honeysuckle family will tend to their own crops, workshops, and other businesses. These will all belong to the Honeysuckle family, and no one else will be allowed to intrude on their property. That's his promise. He reassures Petrov that their land won't change, except for the fact that they will have to follow government laws, which may even allow them to flourish more. The prince also tells him that he can return to his own territory and continue the traditional feudal system. However, once he completes the constitution for his new city and starts expanding, that land will no longer belong to its current owner. Once the meeting is over and Petrov is gone, Nightingale pops up, asking if Petrov will even accept this arrangement. The prince replies that he doesn't know. Petrov's agreement alone won't be enough. He'll also need to convince Duke Holmes, and if Holmes wants to remain a feudal elite, there's not much anyone can do about it. Nightingale asks if Petrov convinces Duke Holmes, then Petrov will be the one governing the capital. The prince starts discussing all the political implications and the changes that will come after he unifies Grey Castle. Everything goes over Nightingale's head. She cuts him off, saying there's no need to explain since she can't understand this stuff anyway. Instead, she mentions that a new witch is coming soon, and she's heading out for investigations. The prince asks if she's going alone, and she replies that she'll have Wendy with her since she's better at this kind of stuff than she is. The prince smiles and says he'll leave it up to them then. Apparently, Nightingale needs to verify every new witch who arrives at the border town. Since the new witches have to remove the Stone of Divine Judgment for Nightingale's mist to determine their truthfulness, the prince can't be present in case anything goes wrong. Scroll came up with 10 different identity questions for Nightingale to ask. Since Nightingale can only tell if someone believes what they're saying, the questions have to be straightforward without any loopholes. Even if a witch manages to lie once or twice, they wouldn't be able to deceive her with all the questions. Suddenly, the old man Barov bursts into the scene, frantically asking the prince if it's true that he's recruiting witches at the rate of 1 golden royal per month. The prince agrees right away, explaining that witches are being paid the highest, making it literally the best-paying job in this age. The old man suggests that if the prince wants witches, he should ask the people to find them, just like when he asked them to expose spies. He argues that the people have the sharpest eyes, and they can be rewarded for their efforts. The prince reminds him that this approach isn't much different from what the church is doing. He hopes the witches will come willingly, and that they can continue to use their own power. You see, issuing rewards for witches might create a frenzy around them, and people could start treating it like a business. That's when Wendy appears and says they've verified the new witch's identity, and she exactly matches Ambassador Petrov's description. The prince reminds how he knew too much caution was unnecessary, but Wendy responds that it's necessary because his personal safety is their top priority. The prince then tells her to bring the girl in, and they quickly usher the little timid girl into the room. Wendy reassures her not to be afraid and introduces her to Prince Roland. As soon as the prince sees her, he can tell she must be panicking inside, since she is in a completely unfamiliar place. So adapting to a new life might take her a long time. After all, she's just a little girl who doesn't have Agatha's intellect or Anna's tenacity. Even Moon and Lily had each other as sisters for support. He then tells Wendy that there's no need to test the girl's abilities just yet. He suggests she should get used to this new, unfamiliar place first. Wendy decides to give the little lady a well-deserved bath, and she'll be staying at the witch branch for now. Later, we find ourselves in a steamy bath scene, where Wendy is gently giving a warm shower to this timid girl. Wendy reflects on how taking care of new witches has practically become part of her job, something the prince specifically assigned to her, especially since she's good at comforting others. She had felt a bit sad not having any witches to take care of for a while, but now she's happy she can be a big sister to someone again. She then notices how skinny this child is, but she is relieved that she is a witch, and with some proper nutrition, she'll bounce back to normal soon enough. Wendy checks the water temperature to see if it's not as hot anymore. She helps the little girl step into the bath, and as soon as she does, the kid feels a shiver run down her spine. But pretty quickly, she starts to chill out as she gets used to the warm water. Wendy begins to rub the girl's back and asks Paper when she awakened as a witch. The girl replies that it was 2 years ago, back in winter. Wendy smiles and says that's pretty common since most witches wake up during the months when demons are out and about, and it's said that magic is at its strongest then. The little girl asks if that means they have devil powers. Wendy, being the big sister, corrects her and tells her that this is absolutely not true. Being a witch is totally normal. The only real difference between witches and mortals is that we have amazing powers. She adds that a few hundred years ago, witches were considered the children of God. She further assures her that having magic is as natural as breathing. The girl asks if her powers will grow. Wendy agrees and says they'll definitely get stronger as she gets older, but she'll need to work hard to control the energy. Otherwise, she might go through anti-phases, and the church uses this to spread lies about witches being possessed. The girl looks pretty down about it. Wendy realizes that since it's her second year of awakening, she probably felt some of that awakening pain last year. To cheer her up, Wendy reassures her that now that she's in the border town, everything will be all right. She explains that if she hurries and starts practicing, this year's awakening day will be a piece of cake, and everyone will be there to support her. Suddenly, Lily bursts into the bathing room, super excited to see the new witch. She says Moon wants to see her too, but Moon claims Lily is the one who wanted to check her out. The girl panics when she sees them and sinks deeper into the bathwater. Wendy quickly reassures her that they're just fellow witches, so there's nothing to be worried about. Lily asks the girl about her powers, and she replies that she can melt snow. Lily follows up, asking if she can also turn water into ice. The girl shakes her head, saying she can only make hot water cold. When Wendy hears this, she perks up, realizing that while melting snow means raising the temperature, cooling hot water lowers it. But since she can't change normal water's temperature, it doesn't sound quite right. Lily places a steaming tub of hot water in front of her and tells her to give it a try. As soon as the girl uses her ability, the water starts to cool down, and the steam disappears right away. The bubbles in the water also vanish, and the movement of the water slows, creating a clear surface. All the witches are left wondering what kind of power this is.